Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We return immediately to that theme which emerged during the course of yesterday's programme and the absolute urgency of returning to a time and a place where we judged actions by their content rather than the identity of the actor. Whether you're talking about jokes on the radio or whether you're talking about the prorogation of Parliament, our position should be the same, regardless of who's doing it. But it clearly isn't, because today the great and the good of the British media and political establishment are lining up to praise a Prime Minister for lying. In the case of Richard Littlejohn, the I think still the most highly paid columnist in the country writing for the Daily Mail, he's quite open about it. He writes in today's Daily Mail that Johnson is obviously yanking the chain of the British public, and he, Richard Littlejohn, absolutely loves it. So when the country's highest paid journalist is praising a Prime Minister for telling lies, what does it say about the state of the nation? I don't know. I'm going out on a limb this morning. I should apologise in advance as well for how much I'm enjoying the news, while simultaneously one's soul shrivels at what it might represent for the country in terms of, I don't know what you do for a living, but there are good days and bad days, right? And that will depend partly, if you're in sales, on how many customers you've got with money burning a hole in their pocket. The journalistic equivalent of a queue of customers crawling around the block with wage packets burning holes in their pockets is for people who do what we do for a living here at LBC Towers. This is exactly the same. This is the January sales of journalism. It really is. But I appreciate that an awful lot of people, and I will play to you later a little clip of a Portuguese woman essentially interrupting a live television interview to describe her plight. I fully appreciate how much horror and upset many people are feeling, and I will acknowledge and recognise that. But I do, once again, as with yesterday, just apologise in advance for the slightly, perhaps, exuberant tone with which we approach these incredibly difficult issues. Because we're looking at something, I think, unprecedented in living memory in Britain. We are looking at a political establishment that is telling untruths to the British public, and it's telling untruths that the British public actually welcome. Not all of us, obviously, but enough, and that's the gamble. We took a call yesterday, I don't know if you were listening, from a chap in Halifax, who I'm sure is a perfectly decent chap and possibly didn't quite realise where he was going to end up when he started talking to me, but he ended up saying he knows Boris Johnson is lying about prorogation and he loves it, he welcomes it, he embraces it. How many times have I said to you, this is all about people who like being lied to? Everything that's happening. From the minute that Farage was allowed into the respectable corners of British media and politics, lies became normalised, lies became mainstream. And you can't undo that. You can't undo that without admitting that you've lied. And if you're not prepared to admit that you've lied, you have to tell more and more lies and just hope that eventually you reach a point where the public either accept it or, even better, embrace it, welcome it. And where a caller led on this programme yesterday, today, the Daily Mail columnist Richard Littlejohn follows. I know he's lying and I love it. Which leads me back to the observation that we also stumbled upon yesterday, and which I reminded you of just a moment ago. This dim and distant past in which you judged an action by its content, not by the identity of the protagonists and antagonists. So Joe Brand makes a joke on the radio. It's obviously a joke. It's in a programme called Heresy, which gives a slight clue, I think, as to what you might expect the comedic content to be. And then a man who claims to be a great champion of free speech and anti-snowflake and followers who are always wanging on about why do people need safe spaces, and you can't what is it, you can't take offence, you can't give offence, you can only take it, and all these people who say you can't say what you want in this country anymore without being called a racist, calling the police practically on a female comedian cracking a joke about battery acid on the wireless. Now, who's a right-wing comedian? No, don't say Boris Johnson or indeed Nigel Farage. I mean, as someone who actually recognises themselves as a comedian. There's a chap called Jeff Norcott who's very funny, actually. He makes a joke about battery acid, if he ever did. It doesn't change the moral content regardless. You see, it doesn't matter what the politics of the person speaking might be. A civilised society has objective standards of behaviour. It has traditional values, right? But it's not just, of course, in the context of comedy that people are basing their opinion entirely upon the identity of the actors and completely ignoring the content of the alleged crime. It's in politics as well. How would you feel if Gordon Brown had suspended Parliament in order to get legislation through, or in order to facilitate nation-changing political shifts, which there is no evidence of broad public support for? How would you feel if Gordon Brown did it? How would you feel if Harold Wilson had done it? How would you feel if Margaret Thatcher did it? How would you feel if Tony Blair had done it? How would you feel if Jeremy Corbyn were to do it next year or the year after? What are you going to do? We're going to suspend Parliament. Why? Because if we suspend Parliament, then it increases the chances of this massive epochal political change, social change, societal change, which all of our own advice, this is the government speaking now, describes in dismal terms. But we're going to do it anyway, because it's the only way our party will survive. And how do you signal this? Well, you set afloat the idea that everybody is as bad as everybody else. This is the Trumpian model. So you still have people in America turning up at rallies to applaud a man whose campaign team, almost the case and more of them are in jail than not now. Many still facing criminal charges. They're actual criminals, people that ran Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Actual imprisoned criminals. But there are still rednecks galore, rednecks to the left of him, rednecks to the right of him, who think that Hillary Clinton's email server somehow constitutes an equivalent offence. You just tell them. It's what fake news is designed to. Everyone's the same. And then you come back to that defence, which will now, I told you yesterday, this will be the next chapter. It doesn't matter that they're lying. They all lie. They all lie. They're all as bad as each other. They all lie. Which means the politicians who tell the truth become public, or at least media, enemy number one. Ditto journalists. The ones that are telling you the truth are the ones that everybody else ends up attacking. For two reasons. Number one, because the truth hurts. And number two, because of the personal injury, the personal insult inflicted upon every lying, conniving journalist and politician in the country by the dwindling band of condescending, sneering Ramonas who still insist on telling you the truth. And the truth is, Boris Johnson is telling porkies. Not just about frozen kippers or marriage vows or ambitions. The government on Sunday, when asked specifically about the possible prorogation of Parliament, explicitly denied that it was even under consideration. And then, when it happened, 24 hours or so later, the Prime Minister claimed publicly that it had nothing to do with Brexit legislation, had nothing to do with making it more difficult to challenge the kamikaze crash-out that will happen on October the 31st. Now, I don't care how you feel about that kamikaze crash-out, whether you're in favour of it or... Well, I do care a bit, because if you are in favour of it, then, you know, give me a ring. I can help you out here, genuinely, out of love and concern. But it doesn't really matter in the context of the question I'm about to ask you. When did the United Kingdom, how did the United Kingdom become a country in which the country's highest paid journalist can applaud in the pages of the Daily Mail a Prime Minister for lying? I occasionally stop, check the rearview mirror, you know? Pull over into the... It's all gone a bit Partridge, actually. I'll stop with the motoring analogies. Pull over into the hard shoulder of Chad. I do occasionally just stop and go, am I going... Is this... What? We've become a country in which the highest paid journalist in the country, in print, in one of the country's best-selling newspapers, is applauding a Prime Minister for fibbing to the public. And he's not alone, as I said. You know, there's a caller to LBC from Halifax yesterday. Today it's Richard Littlejohn. That's astonishing. At least it is to me. And you know deep down that it should be to you. And I know how much effort is involved in somehow seeking to persuade yourself that it doesn't matter or that you approve of it too. We got a clue a couple of months ago with that caller who talked about sides. Do you remember? We talked about Donald Trump and I pointed out he's lying. He was saying there were no protests in London. Do you remember? And there were protests on the other side of the door of the hall in which he spoke. There were protests. We had filmed them, you know? And a caller rang in and said, I don't mind. I know he's lying, but I like it because it upsets people like you. And I thought, okay, it's a bit odd. What do you mean by people like me? People who like the truth? Yeah. Don't like, yeah. Stick it. Yeah, that'll show. Owning the libs by loving liars. It's a bit mad, right? Think back to the inauguration of Donald Trump. I don't know whether or not the fact that Johnson and Rees-Mogg met with Steve Bannon is significant or important. I've got time for the idea that it is. I've got time for the idea that it isn't. But think back to that inauguration, right, where the crowds were smaller than Obama's and it rained. Now, Donald Trump said that the crowds were bigger than Obama's, despite photographic evidence, and insisted that it didn't rain. Those are the most simple of checkable claims, right? Is it raining? Is there water falling out of the actual sky? And can we count those bodies? And they lied. And I don't think it was quite what I thought it was at the time. I think it was a test. It was a test to see who in politics, particularly in the Republican Party or in the American equivalent of the civil service, the machinery of government, and of course the media, the news media, which is a very broad church in America, reaching all the way from Fox News right across to the New York Times. It was a test to see who's going to actually go along with it, or who's going to sort of wave it through, or who's going to roll their eyes and treat it as a sort of charming eccentricity. Who is going to allow lying to infect the very core of our country? That's the question that Donald Trump's team asked when they lied about rain and numbers at the inauguration. I think that Britain is being asked the same question this week. I think that when the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, complains to the Prime Minister that Michael Gove and others, or that government briefings have lied about Operation Yellowhammer, I think when the former Conservative Prime Minister, John Major, joins legal action against the current Conservative Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, over the suspension of Parliament, a suspension which the Prime Minister claims has nothing to do with Brexit, but which people not only know is a lie, but the highest paid journalist in the country applauds the lie, I think that Britain is being asked the same question. Are you going to applaud, look the other way, or just roll your eyes in a eccentric fashion as the executive of the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister of this country and his closest acolytes are asking you a very simple question? Are we going to let lying be normal? Are we going to get lies every day? Are we going to stop insisting that politicians tell the truth and that journalists shout from the rooftops when they're found not to be telling the truth? And I want to know what your answer to that question is. That's what Boris Johnson's asking you. It's what Michael Gove is asking you. It's what Sajid Javid is asking you. It's what Matt Hancock is asking you. It's what this long line of politicians who spoke in the most condemnatory of terms about prorogation but are now silent, they're all asking you.
Boris Johnson's gone further than that as well. He hasn't ruled out proroguing or suspending Parliament in order to push through no deal. Which is absolutely outrageous. The idea of leaving the European Union in order to take back more control into Parliament and to consider closing Parliament in order to deal with that is the most extraordinary idea I've ever heard. I mean, Rory Stewart has said that he would be prepared to set up another parliamentary session across the road. Would you join him? Well, I'm not going to use the same colourful language as Rory, but I certainly feel just as strongly as he does. It is a ridiculous suggestion to consider proroguing Parliament. And for a start, it would involve approaching the Queen. And that, of course, is an absolutely... nobody should consider doing that.
And then there's this idea from some people, you might have heard of it. There's this idea from some people that to deliver Brexit, we should suspend our parliamentary democracy, that we should prorogue Parliament. But that goes against everything that those men who waded onto those beaches fought and died for. And I will not have it.
Must deliver Brexit because it's our democratic duty. But you don't deliver on democracy by trashing democracy. You know, we're not selecting a dictator of our country. We're selecting a prime minister of our country, one of the proudest parliamentary democracies in the world. I think to suggest that you would suspend Parliament and put an end to our sovereign democracy just to suit, some goal that, that hasn't really, to implement democracy is just not right, and we can't do that.
It was felt that it would not be something workable to prorogue Parliament. It's certainly not something I would seek to do anyway.
You wouldn't want to, though, would you? I mean, it completely
no,
subverts parliamentary democracy. You were the leader of the House.
Exactly. No, I'm passionate about parliamentary democracy, and so yes, it was my job to make sure I understood the implications of different outcomes, but certainly not because it was something I was attempting to do.
You think it's a bad idea? Just to be clear, you think it's a bad idea?
Yeah.
What did you think of Sir John Major saying today that he would actually be willing to take that to judicial review if Boris Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament?
Well, I thought it's extraordinary. I'm a great fan of Sir John's, and I think that if it were to happen, I still think, and the One Nation hustings, we quizzed both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt about prorogation. Neither said it was an option that they would be wanting to pursue. I think it would be extraordinary. I think it would lead to a constitutional crisis. But I'm very pleased that we have a past Prime Minister like Sir John, who is still willing to stick his neck above the parapet and say, I would not put up with this. And I think that is an important test of national leadership.
I think it would be a terrible thing if, having said that we should have more power in this country and trust our institutions more, we did, as Dom seems to be implying, and shut the doors on Parliament.
I'm not attracted to archaic devices like prorogation.
Not attracted then, seduced now.
We need to get on with our domestic agenda, and that's why we're announcing a Queen's speech for October the 14th. Okay? Thank you.
Are you comfortable being in a country where the Prime Minister will lie to you in public? I'm not. Are you? I don't know where to start. Well, I've already started, but I mean in terms of offering up evidence for the defence. Philip Hammond was Chancellor of the Exchequer 10 minutes ago. Now he's writing to the Prime Minister from the same party, previously members of the same cabinet, pointing out that Number 10 had, according to the media, briefed that the Yellow Hammer dossier was deliberately leaked by a former minister in an attempt to influence discussions with EU leaders, and that is not true. Quite astonishing. Less astonishing, because, of course, right-wing journalists are generally not as, the word be, reliable as right-wing politicians. Reliable, possibly not quite the right word. Here's Richard Littlejohn in the Mail today. Haven't stopped laughing since Boris bowled the Ramonas a short one, which would have done Jofra Archer proud. He then goes on to list all the tangible benefits of Brexit that he has been writing about for the last 3. No, I'm only joking. He just talks about how much he enjoys seeing other people get cross about the fact that the Prime Minister is lying. Here's the line. Goodness knows how he's managed to keep a straight face, pretending that proroguing Parliament is all about preparing for the Queen's speech, and nothing to do with making sure Brexit actually happens on October the 31st. Cross my heart, hope to die, stand on me, Gov. My word is my bond. Country's highest paid columnist there, applauding a Prime Minister for lying. I'm tempted just to sit here and keep repeating that, actually, until 1 o'clock. We now have prominent senior journalists in the United Kingdom applauding a Prime Minister for lying, cheering, gloating, celebrating. What is the point of journalism if we are going to cheer lying Prime Ministers? You can have a crack at answering that question as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I guess, in many ways, I want you to call me if you're loving it, actually. I want you to explain to me why you like being lied to. But that might be quite a big ask. Janet is in Glasgow. Janet, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. What I'd like to say is, I had a friend phone me on Wednesday morning, and she immediately said to me, What's wrong? What's up with you?
Yeah.
Because my voice had gone so flat. I was feeling so upset and distressed. And it was like the last couple of days of my father's life. I felt that grim.
Oh, gosh.
About it all. I mean, that emotional, because I feel that our country is just being taken away from us.
Watch and listen to them squealing like stuck pigs, Richard Littlejohn would say in response to what you've just shared with us.
Yeah. Well, I've got no intention of being left as a stuck pig. I'm in Hampshire for the week just now, helping out a friend. If I wasn't dog sitting, I'd have been up at College Green the other evening with everybody else, and I'll be out at every opportunity.
But what is it that you are most troubled by, most upset by?
I look ahead and I see that we cannot trust anything that's said. So anything that's said today is nothing. The coinage has no value whatsoever.
Oh, that's a good phrase.
I do fear that the National Health Service will be taken away from us.
Yes.
I do fear that, I mean, I'm very, very pro-Scottish independence, and this is only going to make it even more intense. I do fear that everything will be rained against us to undermine that, to just dismantle what we have, to dismantle the Scottish Parliament, to dismantle our devolution, to really, really disregard Northern Ireland, disregard Wales, disregard Scotland, disregard anywhere else that's not part of a very, very tight little privileged elite.
Well, except that, you know, Johnson will... He's in with a very, very good chance of doing better than Theresa May if there were to be a general election. So it's not just, you might say it's only to the benefit of a very tiny elite, but it's a very tiny elite that are being propelled and supported by people who would never consider themselves to be parts of a tiny elite. In fact, the people who've spent 3 or 4 years being fed the line that the tiny, powerful elites are somehow their enemy, you know, those tiny, powerful elites like Gary Lineker.
This is what makes me despair, because how do we reconnect with people who are accepting lies, who are applauding lies, who are thinking, yeah, stick it to them. Yeah, great, this is one for our team. We don't care how we win. They don't even know what game they're involved in. I've had people look at me absolutely think I'm some mad, conspiracy theorist for saying this is about, this is about capitalism gone mad. This is about chaos capitalism. There are people going to make a lot of money out of it.
It might be for the driving forces. I don't, for the record, think that many journalists are involved in that. I think that they're just too proud to admit that they've spent their entire careers not understanding what the European Union membership represented. I managed to explain that view in a tweet the other day, which features very prominently in today's Daily Mail, along with a rather lovely picture of me, which my mum is particularly delighted by. But I digress slightly. I don't think the journalists are doing it, and I don't... Here's my problem. I know that you've got some people who've made big donations to Boris Johnson who are also known to have made a killing out of the collapse in the pound on the night of the referendum, and some of them are investing again in... they will make a profit out of economic damage, but there aren't enough of them. Are there I mean, I'm thinking what the long term is, and you read that dreadful book by Priti Patel and Dominic Raab and the rest of them, where they talk about British workers being the most idle, among the most idle in the world, and even if you get rid of all these protections, even if you get rid of the baseline of worker protections that European Union membership represents. And of course, as you say, the coinage has no value now, so all of the politicians in Boris Johnson's government who've previously said, we won't go below any of those lines, we shall go even further, you can't trust a single syllable of that anymore, because they're now facilitating and applauding blatant lies. I just don't quite see what it looks like. I mean, I can joke about it'll look like, you know, Marty McFly's hometown in Back to the Future 2, but that doesn't really work, does it? We're not going to become a kind of offshore gambling hub. What does it look like? What is it you're most frightened of?
I think I'm most frightened of the dismantling of things that we're currently taking for granted. We currently will assume the minute
losing what we've got.
Losing what we've got, and by God, what we've got, we have to try and strive to improve.
And then we're back to the very essence of Brexit, which was facilitated largely by people who thought they had nothing to lose. People with jobs, people with livelihoods, people with access to a still brilliant health service who thought that they were the left behind and had nothing to lose.
I also fear for my own income, my own future, because if there is a downturn, which all of this could so easily provoke, I'll lose out.
Yes, well, I think, and that's, again, we return back to the essence of Brexit, because for every Janet worrying about being worse off, there is a Brexiter apparently adamant that they definitely knowingly voted to be worse off and can't wait to be a bit poorer than they are now, or even a lot poorer. I suppose the poorer you get, the bigger Brexit success becomes, does it, if we're living in this warped universe? 27 minutes after 10, I'm just hearing that a legal challenge aimed at stopping Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament has been denied an interim interdict at the Court of Session in Edinburgh. I'm not going to fib to you. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I will double-check and bring you up to speed imminently. Question we're asking. Well, all sorts of questions on the board today, but I'm very grateful to Richard Littlejohn, the Daily Mail columnist, for leading where John in Halifax led yesterday. John, I mean, I felt he was a little reluctant and embarrassed by the end of the conversation. Little John isn't. Absolutely delighted that the Prime Minister is lying to the British public. And I've only really paddled in the shallows of British journalism. I certainly have never come close to editing. I've written the odd column. I've presented Newsnight. I've been doing this job for more years than I care to remember. So, you know, I've been at the crease for a while, but I'm far from an opening batsman. I can't quite get my head around the idea that journalists are cheering a Prime Minister for telling lies. I really can't. Can you? 0345 6060 973. It's genuinely incredible. Plenty of politicians have misled the British public in the past. Some have done it consciously, I think. Some have done it unconsciously. Some have walked that weird middle ground. Best, I think, distilled by a story I heard about Jack Straw having an article read to him in the car on the way to an interview, so that when an interviewer asked him if he'd read the article, he could say no. Do you see? That weird dissembling, that's out of fashion now. You just tell a blatant lie. Michael Gove telling a lie on Twitter about Operation Yellowhammer. Boris Johnson telling a lie on television about why he's prorogued Parliament. And I don't understand why people don't care. 0345 6060 973. One answer, of course, is because it will make Brexit happen and Brexit's going to be brilliant, at which point we all say, how? And they all sort of collapse. So that Scottish story in full. A judge has refused to order a temporary halt to the shutting down of the British Parliament while a case is heard. So it would be a bit like saying you can't move out of the house until we've concluded the divorce. So the case is going ahead. The hearing has been brought forward, actually. It will now be heard next Tuesday rather than Friday. But the 75 parliamentarians seeking what's called an interim interdict were also seeking to have Parliament shut down. That's not going to happen. The judge sitting, Lord Doherty, said he was not satisfied there was a cogent need for it. And I think interdict or interdict, to do it phonetically, is best understood as an injunction. It's a form of injunction. But of course, Scottish law and English law are very different, which is why we've all voted to leave the European Union, because Brussels imposes laws on O. Well, that doesn't quite work, does it? Oh, well, a bit late now. Alex is in Leeds. There's something a bit weird happening, Alex. I will, if I were minded, be able to fill my programme today with people saying politicians have always lied, politicians have always lied. What's changed is that their cheerleaders in the media are admitting it and still cheering. So if you believed that Tony Blair had lied about weapons of mass destruction, you'd have to find newspaper columnists saying, ha-ha, Tony Blair's lying about weapons of mass destruction. I love it. I love it. In fact, I think, doesn't Little John even go for the McDonald's? Yeah, here you go. Oh, man alive. In the words of the McDonald's advert, I'm loving it, writes a Brexit cheerleader about a Brexit Prime Minister lying to the country. That's the big change, and I don't quite get it. What would you like to say?
First of all, good morning, James. First-time caller. I've been following your career very closely since you were sat on the sofa with Kate Silverton on the Right Stuff all those years ago. That's how old I am. Anyway, I've got a few points to make. I'm going to race through them because I know you've got a lot of callers. So, first of all, I want to try and explain the current phenomenon we're in, and I think all these points are interrelated. So, I think we're in an age of rage. People are very angry, and because I think people now get their information and news sources from things like online media, Facebook feeds, you know, they just want to get their news from, sources that will confirm their own biases and prejudices, and that happens on both sides.
Yeah, why? And I don't know if it does happen on both sides. You'll be able to find examples on both sides. But
I'm not saying it's equal on both sides.
No,
I think there is evidence of it on both sides.
But why? Why?
Because I think we're in this kind of post-truth era, and I think that's also down to a lack of critical thinking skills. But here's the thing. Up until prorogation, that held a lot of water, that argument. But we've moved now. I think that's the point of today's phone-in, is that now you've got people cheering the lies while acknowledging that they are lies. So, I took a call last year from a Donald Trump supporter in Crawley who, when I said to him, what about that filmed footage of Trump doing X, Y, and Z, he just came back and said, fake news, fake news, fake news. They used to pretend it wasn't true. Now they're admitting it's a lie,
and still cheering. That's very different from having your prejudices endorsed. That is actually the party's final command. Ignore the evidence of your own eyes and ears. The final, most terrible command. That's where we are, mate.
Indeed, and like you said, I mean, I've been listening to your show for a while, and you're quite right. It's a footballification, if that's the right phrase, of not just politics, but a lot of things, you know, which is, you know, and there is evidence to support this. You know, one of Donald Trump's biggest appeals isn't that necessarily, you know, the people who vote for him, particularly those in the left-behind Rust Belts, you know, those who feel that, you know, that minorities, you know, black and Hispanic minorities and women have advanced ahead of them. It's the fact that even if their own material position worsens under Donald Trump, if the other person or the other group or the other lot are suffering or hurting, well, they don't mind because
and I don't mind. Yeah, and I don't mind being lied to because this guy is on my side in the culture war, in this completely manufactured culture war, devised largely to make heterosexual middle-aged white males feel that they're some form of oppressed minority.
Exactly, and if I can just, you know,
briefly, if you would.
I will.
Yeah, go on.
So, as I said, you know, to your researcher, so, you know, I studied philosophy at university, and particularly philosophy degrees, you learn about logic, critical thinking, to understand and critique the arguments of your opponents as if they were your own, you know. So, and also to make sure that when you are looking at sources to either support or challenge other opinions, you get it from at least 3 sources.
Yes.
And I think critical thinking skills, and I know they are talking about introducing that into the national curriculum, but it's something, even at GCSE level, as an actual paper. I know in America they teach critical thinking skills, whether that's done any good, I leave that to others to decide, but there was a lack of critical thinking, a lack of challenging, you know, and interrogating the opinions and the sources of information and where they come from, and also who's saying them. And you've got to have some, you know, I guess nobody trusts anything anymore, you know.
Except they do, or do they pretend to? I mean, again, I apologise for using personal examples, but I had a hilarious experience last week where the Guido Fawkes website wrote an article about my book doing very badly because it was the deal of the day on Amazon for 99p for the e-book, the Kindle version, and they wrote this farrago of nonsense, for which I'm very grateful because, for what it's worth, my book was actually the bestseller on the whole of Amazon last week, partly as a result. So, I you know, royalties galore. But people know it's not true. You see, they know it's not true. They dislike me so much, or my condescending, remoaning, sneering, that they choose to pretend. They pretend. That's the psychological bit I don't get. You know,
it's this infantilization. Look, the people who are doing the lying, right? And you know, you can deconstruct this how you want. Yeah. They know the truth. They know the game. It's all a game. You know? And like you said, the people at the top who are either peddling or even admitting now that these are open lies. They're infantilizing.
But that's a big change, mate. That's what I keep coming back to, because you could have made this call a week ago. You're not acknowledging the change that has happened.
There has been a change, though.
There has. They never previously said, I know he's lying and I love it. That's new. They pretended they thought he was telling the truth, you know? Breaking point posters and stuff. They pretended they believed it, or they did believe it.
I think, if you take it in the context of Brexit, I think they can see the prize, they can almost taste it and touch it and feel it, to the point where they're so confident, you know, there could be hubris, you know,
but only as an intangible. They can't taste it and touch it and feel it as something they can actually describe in positive terms.
No, but I think the fact that they think with somebody like Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings et al., you know, in their corner, and seeing us Ramonas, you know, panicking and going for, you know, judicial reviews.
And the only way they can keep that balloon inflated is by, they can no longer pretend that he's not lying. They have to admit that he's lying, and they have to admit that they love it.
But I love digging it in and rubbing our noses in it. 2 very quick points, and I will shut up, I promise.
Well, no, I've interrupted too much. You're going to have to do it in 30 seconds. Go on.
OK, so the thing that annoys me is, and you've said it as before, the fact that we all have opinions, but not
don't treat them all as equal. Point two.
Because Jon Stewart, the former host of the Daily Show, is the difference between a Liberal and a Conservative. A Liberal will say, it's raining outside. A Conservative will say, no, it's not. A Liberal will put their hand out the window, it gets wet. And his conclusion is reality has a liberal bias.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the best example of that, of course, would be the actual rain at Donald Trump's inauguration, which I alluded to a moment ago. Alex, thank you. Phone lines are open, remember, if you want to challenge or dilute this liberal loving and explain why it's good to have a Prime Minister who lies to the public and prominent journalists who cheer while acknowledging that he's lying. And I stress again, a Prime Minister, i.e. any Prime Minister, not just this one because you like the cut of his jib. You want to live in a country where the Prime Minister lies to the public and gets applauded by the country's best-paid journalists. You could have just moved to Russia. Duff's in Tooting. Duff, what would you like to say?
Hi, mate. First-time caller today.
Very welcome.
Ultimately, I want to say that I think that this lie that's been told is actually a good thing.
Which one?
The prolonging of Parliament.
Proroguing.
I ultimately think...
What about the Operation Yellowhammer, the dossier describing terrible, terrible implications of a no-deal Brexit that the government lied about? Is that good as well?
I don't particularly agree with that lie.
Oh, okay.
I think I agree with the fifth.
Well, you can't agree with a lie, mate.
Well, I think if you go back to your original point, as you sort of mentioned on the show at the beginning, the context, I think the context is everything.
Yes.
Ultimately, for the past 2 years...
It's not, though, is it? That's the whole point about lies.
No, but in this case, the context is sort of... It justifies the lie.
Right. And there you are, live on national radio, approving of being lied to by a Prime Minister. How do you think that happened?
Because ultimately, for 2 years, we haven't accomplished anything in Brexit. And for the first time...
Because the truth is more difficult than a lie.
But if there is no truth anyway...
Of course there's truth.
There hasn't been truth.
Of course there's been truth.
Like what?
Like you cannot accommodate Theresa May's red lines and the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay.
Simple truth. Ergo, the backstop becomes an obstacle which will be insuperable unless they come up with a technological solution that currently doesn't exist. The truth. It's been the truth for 3 years.
Okay, so
I'm just more interested in you now. I'm interested in how you've ended up, how you think you've ended up on national radio saying I like being lied to.
So the way I look at it is, as a young person, I'm 22.
I don't care. I want to know why you like being lied to.
Because I believe that it's going to get something actually achieved in the political world in terms of Brexit.
Right.
And then we can actually get back to matters or things that matter, issues that matter. Is that a fair point or not?
Not even close, because you don't get to control where the lies begin and end. You just get to decide whether or not you're going to usher them in with warm applause. And you've already decided.
Haven't we been lied at?
And there you are, ushering it in with warm applause. Hoping, it'll just be one lie. It'll just be one lie. It might be the most important political shift since 1945 that they're lying about, but it's only one. And once we've got that lie out of the way, everything will be fine. Why would they stop lying to you, Duff, do you think?
But this lie is so much more justified.
Why do you think they'd stop lying to you? What makes you think they'd stop lying to you if you applaud them for this one?
I absolutely don't, but the fact that we haven't applauded...
So you don't think they'd stop lying to you, but you're glad that they are?
Yeah, pretty much for this.
And there you are, mate. Just press pause on your phone, rewind, listen back to what you just said, and weep.
In the UK, a police officer is assaulted every 20 minutes. After a spate of attacks, calls are now growing to arm our police with tasers.
The risks have now changed to police officers. We see that risk increasing.
On subject to status, over 18s, T's and C's apply. Order and register by September 30th. Retail customers at participating dealers only.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
10:50 is the time. Gratitude, albeit a sort of tearful gratitude to the last caller. Poignant, actually, gratitude to the last caller. 22 years old, as he mentioned, and happy to be lied to by a Prime Minister. Because what's not normal today becomes normal tomorrow. That's how it works. And I'm still a little wary of some of the most apocalyptic predictions, the use of the word coup. But then you wonder, why would somebody like John Major, who should really just be preparing for the next Test match, is it at Old Trafford? Anyway, that's not the point. He should just be concentrating on his cricket and enjoying his retirement. But that's what public duty looks like. Public duty isn't asking people to send you £100 a month so that you can tour the country speaking to rooms full of people who've swallowed your lies for 20 years. Public duty, putting your head above a parapet. Gina Miller isn't even a public servant. She's a private citizen. Already seen one person jailed for threatening her. That's public service. That's patriotism, concern for country. John Major painting a huge target on his back for rhetorical attacks from everywhere. I mean, the list of those of us attacked in the Mail today it's like an honours board of decency, honesty, and integrity, with a couple of glorious exceptions, like me. That's what it looks like, and yet the politicians and the pundits and the journalists who would normally be outraged at being lied to, or if they were very cynical and very careerist and very focused on the prize or putting career and party before country, or they'd pretend they didn't think they were being lied to. Yeah, that's where we were just last week, beginning of this week. Oh no, when we talked about prorogation, we didn't mean that kind of prorogation, we meant that sort of prorogation. And they know that they're spinning, they know that but they can just about persuade themselves. Now we're in very different waters. Now they are lying. And we, or you, or our last caller, and John in Halifax yesterday, and Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail today, are publicly admitting to loving it, liking it, applauding it. Where does that end? 0345 6060973. I mean it. I've been pretty careful the last few months not to overreach on these issues. I don't like using the word fascist, for example. I've diluted that a little bit. One of the upshots of the increased profile that this programme now enjoys is that, you know, people suddenly pay enormous amounts of attention to what we say. And you have to kind of respect that. You're not operating a little below the radar like we were when I started doing this job. National news now if I drop a clanger on this radio programme. In fact, my tweets are national news, according to the Daily Mail today. It's unbearable, isn't it? It's not my fault. I didn't ask for any of this. But the point, that's why I don't use the word fascist as freely as perhaps I used to. But this is really, really, really incredible, okay? I've written for the Daily Mail. I got friends that work there. It is, whether you like it or not, it's an astonishingly powerful piece of print media. Under the last editor, it was disgusting, absolutely disgusting. Under the current editor, it has moved quite far away from that. But today, in Richard Littlejohn's column, well, I'm afraid it plumbs new depths of professional depravity, because it cheers a Prime Minister for lying. That's incredible. Not for the first time, where my callers lead, lazy right-wing journalists follow. But it's rarely felt quite as significant as it does today. What's happened? Peter's in Merseyside. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yes. I'm a bit like the lady who phoned you from Scotland when I heard the news. I think Littlejohn's comments, his article, for me represents the culmination of many years of incremental steps that have been testing the British public to see just how far they can push this.
Again, you're more conspiratorial about it than I am. I just think he's got two choices. He's got three choices. Either he explains why Brexit's a good idea, either he admits that he was wrong to say that Brexit was a good idea, or he claims that it's all worthwhile because people like you and me are getting upset. And that's the option he's chosen. The easiest, laziest, cash the cheque, home by tea time option.
Yes, that's quite true. But I think it's one of these things is he has said it because he is confident he can, and there will be no questioning. Nobody really will in any sort of ministerial or government. I mean, have you heard anyone from the Labour Party screaming out about this morning?
No, but it's only a newspaper column, and there's always a slight danger that you end up promoting something even while you condemn it. But I think occasionally the interceptions, the interventions are of such import that you'd be remiss not to mention it. Labour Party have got more to worry about than a column applauding the Prime Minister for lying. They should be attacking the Prime Minister for lying, not attacking the columnists applauding him for lying.
But as I say, I know you say it does sound conspiratorial, but
it's the plan. Sorry, I'm talking over you. You think there's been a plan all this time? I mean, you might be right when you look at the think tanks and their quotes educational charities.
That's exactly one of the points I was just going to say. Over the years, we've had these think tanks on many, many programmes telling us or discussing in rather, nice ways of saying it. Look, don't worry about the manifestos. They don't mean anything.
Don't worry about workers' rights. Don't worry about anti-smoking legislation. Don't worry about sugar taxes.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And this has been the test. Can we get away with it? I mean,
and in order to prove to you that you were wrong to say that there was a plan or a conspiracy in place, we would, of course, have to know who funded these so-called think tanks and lobby groups and educational charities. But they, of course, furiously refuse to reveal who funds them, which, of course, adds to the idea that maybe there are some very, very, very wealthy, sinister individuals in the background pulling the strings and seeking to persuade the British public to vote against their own interests.
Which is exactly right. I mean,
to Brexit.
Me, it is there. That these bodies are there, the people who are in the background. I mean, I just read an article just this week, not discussed on the press, but it was in one of the news feeds, that equity funds are now buying up foster income agencies.
It was a brilliant investigation by the BBC, actually. We criticised them quite a lot, but credit where it's due. Astonishing. Venture capital, essentially.
Venture capitalists. Now, to me...
Seeing a financial opportunity in fostering.
What do they call it? State-funded capitalism. I think that's just where we're going. I mean, I think the privatisation of the NHS is a diversion for us to hold on to this.
And of course it can be challenged and undermined. I mean, some of the expert analysis I've read worries more about pharmaceutical supply than it does about actual ownership of hospitals or procedures. It's more about what you pay for drugs, and some of the comparisons between what you pay in America and what you pay in Europe for drugs are truly chilling. And that's just as objective observers like you and I, Peter. If you needed that medicine to stay alive or to stay healthy, it would be more than just chilling. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive, but I'm glad I've got callers like you to at least float the boat of plan and conspiracy. And then, of course, you remember that appalling book written by Priti Patel and Dominic Raab, now Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary, describing you, not just Peter, but everyone listening to this programme, British workers among the most idle on the planet, and a school of thought that is abroad now and is almost always on your telly, almost always on your radio, arguing that we need to have lower taxes for wealthy people and fewer protections for workers. And I said to you, actually, when you started asking me a couple of years ago, why don't you just wait and see? Why do you keep banging on about Brexit? And I did have moments where I thought, oh, leave it now, mate. But I just thought, if liars prosper, if cheats prosper and liars win, then unlike old Duff on the line a few minutes ago, I don't believe when they get away with one lie, they pack up the machinery of lying and go back to at least pretending to tell the truth. It will only get worse. And now, well, it is. And it's an interesting day where the Prime Minister... there's been a thing. I've never been quite sure how to say this to you without sounding like I was ungrateful for people who ring into the programme. But the traditional mode of radio phoning is a little bit unreal, isn't it? It's a little bit irrational. We've all fallen into the trap over the years of enjoying the foaming at the mouth caller. The old adage I employ about it being much easier to sell tickets for the ghost train than it is for the speak your weight machine. Well, that translates, of course, into you'd rather listen to people screaming in terror, even though ghosts don't exist, than you would a succession of callers telling you how much they weigh. Do you see what I mean? That works, doesn't it? And an analogy extends to another level. So I say it's a lot easier. I sell tickets for the speak your weight machine, but I employ the tactics of the ghost train attendant. It's a lonely furrow, but here I am ploughing away, and I still get callers from people sitting on the ghost train, which is essentially what keeps me in beer. But in terms of the punters, what do you want to hear? You want to hear people ringing in, go, down with, I don't know, gays, trans people, children, or do you want to hear people ringing in going, I weigh 17 stone 6 ounces. I weigh 11 stone 4 ounces. I mean, it's a balance. But the phone-in in Britain and America has always been a particularly welcoming place for absolute lunatics. I never really thought that kind of attitude would be reflected in the upper echelons of government and journalism. But now, you got Little John in the Mail today, sounding like one of my maddest callers. Hey, the Prime Minister's lying to me, and I love it, I do. The Prime Minister's lying, hey, I'm loving it, like a McDonald's advert, I am, hey. £1 million a year he gets for that. And you've got politicians essentially going along with it. It's astonishing, to the point that a former Conservative Prime Minister is taking legal action to sound an alarm, to say, whoa, I mean, again, how many phrases, how many times have I said to you in the last few weeks? Well, I haven't been here for 2. How many times have I said to you this year? I'm going to say that again because I can't quite believe it's happening on our watch. A former Prime Minister from the Conservative and Unionist Party is going to court in order to stop a current Prime Minister from the Conservative and Unionist Party suspending Parliament for political reasons. That Prime Minister has lied about why he's suspending Parliament, and prominent journalists and politicians and punters ringing my radio show absolutely love it. I love being lied to, they say. And this is what I've said to you quite a few times. Don't get cross with John in Halifax or with Duff, the caller moments ago, or with any of the other people that ring me up to say things that are so detached from security and reality that many of us still boggle. Don't get cross with them or upset with them. If you're getting paid £1 million a year to write in the Daily Mail, oh, I love it, I do, I love being lied to, it's like that McDonald's advert, I'm loving it, I'm Richard Littlejohn, hey. He's getting paid millions to do that. How can you get cross with some poor sod in Halifax who's doing exactly the same thing? You can't. How did it come to this? 11:06. Jeffrey's in Woking. Jeffrey, what would you like to say?
Good morning, Idle James. This is Idle Jeffrey.
Hello, Idle Jeffrey.
We were warned about this behaviour from the Prime Minister by not only the opposition politicians, but from his own party and his own fellow cabinet ministers, that he was unfit to govern.
Yeah, Amber Rudd.
Now,
it wouldn't let him drive me home at night.
So many, you could count them all day. The thing is, he's seen how President Trump has got away with lying. He's seen what he's achieved through these years of lying, and he's thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. He's got his blinkers on. He's got 2 things on his mind: getting out of the EU without a deal and getting re-elected as the Prime Minister. And I can just see him now, standing outside Number 10, ruffling his hair, saying, well, I've had to tell a few porkies, you know, but we've got out of the EU and I'm back here at Number 10. I was listening to a programme. I watched the West Wing the other week.
Oh, yeah.
And the president was talking to one of his staff, and he said, I was talking to a governor, and the governor, and I said to the governor, you're lying. And the governor said, I know, but hear me out. We've got to that point now that he's rallying his troops, the Brexit extremists, and he wants them all to vote for him. He'll say, I've got out of the EU, vote for me and put me into Number 10. And that's what his aim is.
But there is, again, I don't think I dispute anything you've said, but again, there is something different. And I know it takes a while for the dust to settle on big change. It's like they've turned up the temperature again on the frog in the pan full of water. So it takes a while to notice. And when we do notice, it's already too late. But something about applauding lies. Even Donald Trump's supporters pretend not to know that he's lying. You know, that's why fake news is such a powerful weapon for them. Every time it's pointed out that he's lying, they say it's fake news. So they're actually saying, no, he's not lying. We seem to have gone further. We seem to have reached a point, not just this clown in the Mail today, but people ringing me, decent people ringing me, who aren't doing it for money, that they now are saying, I am being lied to and I love it. That's different.
There's 2 areas. One is, you said it many times, if the lie is big enough and they shout it loud enough, people will start to believe it, and people are getting desensitised to lies. Once upon a time, we all know politicians over the years have told lies, but once upon a time, a big lie like this would cause a sensation. But now we're getting so used to these big lies coming from people like Boris Johnson that we're becoming sensitised.
And to go back to again, you've got a former Conservative Prime Minister taking a current Prime Minister to court, and you've got a former Conservative Chancellor, in Philip Hammond's case, only a few weeks out of the job, complaining about the current government lying. The media, it's astonishing.
And of course, the hardcore Brexiters, they don't mind if he tells a few lies. The more the better.
Because it allows them to continue denying reality and admitting their mistake.
Exactly.
It's that simple. But how else? I mean, you look at Little John talking about how much he's loving it. What's the alternative? The alternative is to say, everything I've written about the European Union for the last 30 years was I mean, give him the benefit of the doubt, it was a genuine mistake made in good faith because I believe bad sources. Or, I've been feeding you nonsense for 30 years.
He's not big enough for that, James.
Of course they're not. None of them are.
It takes a big man to stand up in public and say, look, we were wrong, we made a terrible mistake. Brexit in any shape or form is going to be a disaster.
And do you know there is a Daily Mail columnist who, of course, has done that, or at least come very close to that, and that's Peter Oborne, one of the finest practitioners of the art in this country. So it is doable, but as you say, it's a sign of character, it's a sign of integrity, it's a sign of honesty, decency, and that is sadly lacking in this profession as much as it is in any other. 10 minutes after 11 is the time. Do you like being lied to? Just talk people like Geoffrey and me through the whys of it, the whys and the wherefores of it. And of course, you know, the bedrock under which, upon which everything else rests, everything Brexit-related rests, is this, as I said to you some time ago, there are no reasons to do it anymore. No one's even pretending that there are reasons to do it. We have to do it because we voted for it. Why did you vote for it? Because we want to do it. Why do you want to do it? Because we voted for it. Yeah, but why did you vote for it? Because we want to do it. Yeah, but why do you want to do it? Because we voted for it. Yeah, but what are the reasons? What are the whys, the wherefores? Why do you want to do it? Well, I used to think something about fish or bananas or passports or 3-pin plugs or salt and vinegar, fish and chips, or what did we have this week? We had a humdinger this week, didn't we? The grapes. Why do you want to leave the European? Because you're not allowed to crush grapes with your feet anymore. For the record, we think you are, but it didn't stop that fella who rang in. And again, I'd say, if these are the people, these are like tips of icebergs. They've got the guts to ring national radio. So rarely do these positions go unchallenged these days, and why would they go unchallenged on a radio phone? And if you can write a column in the Daily Mail and get paid £1 million for it, spouting similar nonsense, why do you actually want to do it? I've run out of reasons, James, but there is one massive one left, because it's upsetting people like you. I'm loving it, I am. I'm loving it. Prime Minister's lying to me and I'm loving it. Why? Because it's upsetting you. You know, Little John even writes it. It's lovely, this. I mean, it's almost like he wrote it for me, to be honest, because every time I reach for it, there's yet more evidence of the thesis that I'm suggesting to you today. Haven't stopped laughing since Boris bowled the Ramonas a short one, which would have done Jofra Archer proud. Get that in the lower abdomen for a start, mate. Drawing he's saying, essentially, that this is like being hit by a bodyline bowl. And the people that applaud him call the police when Joe Brand makes a joke about battery acid. It's just hilarious. I mean, it is genuinely hilarious. But unfortunately, it's also real. So what's happened? How did you end up in a place where you not only are being lied to, but you are celebrating the fact? Answer, because it's really upsetting those Ramonas. Yeah, it's really upsetting people who think your life is about to get worse. What happens if it does? Does that really, you love it? Look at those salty Remainer tears. You'll ring me up and say, I've lost my job. Ha, 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 James, I've lost my job. Ha, ha, you salty Ramona. Yeah, right. My savings have gone down. My house price has got a bit... What? I'm stuck in a queue outside Dover. That'll teach you, you sneering, condescending remote. So the more you suffer, somehow... This is what they've done to you. This is what the Farages and the Johnsons and the Raabs and the Rees-Moggs have done to you. They've turned you into a person who is genuinely now thinking, I'm going to love it when I get hurt because people like James O'Brien will feel sorry for me. Just have a little think about that. I'm loving the salty Remainer tears. People like Gary Lineker and J.K. Rowling and John Major and Ken Clarke and Dominic Grieve, they're really, really worried that the country has embarked upon an utterly unnecessary course of self-harm and damage. And you somehow love it, despite the fact that you're the one that's going to suffer the harm? Much more than they are. Much, much more than they are. What do you think motivates them? Why has John Major got out of bed this morning? To protect you from politicians that are now lying to you. And you can't even... Now, this is how far they've gone, how far they've taken you. I say to you, John Major is going to court to protect you from politicians in his own party who are lying to you, and you can't even say to me now, they're not lying. They've even taken away the fig leaf of fake news, because you've got Little John in the Mail saying, of course he's lying, and I love it. John Major is going to court to protect you from politicians that are lying, and Daily Mail columnists are loving the fact that you're being lied to. But hey, you enjoy those salty Remainer tears. where we are just contemplating one single element of the Brexit brouhaha. If you're just joining me, I apologise again for enjoying this journalistically. All right, it's a bit like being a fisherman and finding yourself with the biggest fish you've ever caught on the end of your line. You don't know what to do. It's incredibly thrilling and exciting, but I know it's not much fun for the fish. All right, so let's leave that there. We have reached a point, an astonishing point. All of my analogies have come home to roost today. But the best, of course, is the frog boiling one. Because today, prominent journalists and politicians are simultaneously acknowledging and applauding Boris Johnson's lies. Nobody thinks he's prorogued Parliament in order to assemble a legislative agenda that would be shared in the Queen's speech. Jacob Rees-Mogg, claiming that it's routine, was not telling the truth. If it was routine, then it would have happened before. It is the longest suspension of Parliament since 1945. John Major prorogued Parliament in 1997, but he did so in order to avoid scrutiny of the Cash for Questions inquiry, and there was a general election at the end of the process. I think, again, it was only 80% on that. And nobody said, he's lying and I love it. That's what's different. So I know what you're being fed. I know that you'll be given these lines from all the usual places, which are designed to persuade you that this isn't a big deal, or that John Major is being paid by George Soros, or whatever it might be. But here's the point that you can't argue with anymore. They are cheering the lies. That's Orwellian. Again, perhaps a comparison that's been overused over the years. They're cheering the lies, and you're either with that or you're against it. There are no nuances here. This is actually binary. You are either in favour of a Prime Minister lying to the public and being applauded and cheered by members of both the House of Commons and Her Majesty's media, or you're against it. You're either for it, I love being lied to, and then if you're Richard Littlejohn, you can insert a advertising slogan from McDonald's. You're either loving it or you're diametrically opposed to it. There's no middle ground here. There's no grey area, despite John Major's intervention. It's 21 minutes after 11. Andy is in Brentwood. Andy, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, hello, James. I'm a complete leaver, a staunch leaver. But in regard to the issue you're now speaking about, he lies the moment he wakes up in the morning. And the point I'm going to say is this. That when he done what he did the other day to do his doing, Hitler done that in Germany in regards to, began as Chancellor. I want to leave. I still want to leave. I'll still vote to leave. But what he's doing is a slippery slope to, well, if that's all right, we'll get away with that one. We'll do it down the line.
Not just get away with it. Not just get away with it, mate. Get applauded and cheered for it by your. I'm going to say this with love and respect, by your lot. I appreciate you're not one of them, but there won't be any Remainers going, I love being lied to by the Prime Minister today, will there?
No, there won't be. But the point I'm getting over is the Remainers have a right, the same as the Leavers, to air their views. The problem you've got is for the last 40 years since...
If you would. It's still the school holidays. That's all right. Don't worry.
So, what I'm trying to get over is that basically he scratches his head, does his Laura and Hardy routine. I'm one of you and I'll get up and I know how you struggle. You know and I know what Boris Johnson's about, and he's not a very nice person, I'll put in those polite words. As a Leaver... Okay, I voted to leave because I believe. I just believe what I believe, and
I'm not going to do that today. I'm not going to haul you over the coals. But can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
Why do you think the only way in which Brexit can happen is by letting a liar lead?
I wouldn't be voting for this liar.
No, I know, but mate, they've tried everything else. The only way you can get it over the line is by mainstreaming lies and having half of my profession applauding them.
James, could I say one thing to you?
Yeah.
If you get a chance, go online and look at a film called The Mortal Storm, 1940, James Stewart.
I will, but I want you to answer my question, though, because they've tried everything else. The only way they can pull this off is by lying to the British public. Does that not make you wonder whether you were right to support it in the first place?
I believe I was right to vote out of Europe, to come out of Europe, but I didn't. I asked Andrew Rosenthal in the last election, why have I got to vote you to get what I voted for? Basically, they're right-wing nutters.
You're not answering my question.
Sorry, what was the question?
Doesn't it give you pause when you recognise that the only way it can happen is by letting a liar lie?
I follow you. I see what you're saying, but that's down to the British public being dumbed down in politics.
Well, it might be. I mean, I'm
not one of them. I would never vote Conservative in my lifetime, never have done. The point I'm saying is, you know and I know what he's about. He's a nasty piece of work. And if he
he's your best chance of getting what you want. Doesn't that make you wonder about the wisdom of what you want?
No, the wisdom is this. I would not want Brexit based on the basis of having this Nazi in power.
Well, that's a bit strong. He's not an actual Nazi,
well,
clearly. But I know you use it as a figure of speech. Mate, we're living in difficult times. The snowflakes are ringing the police about jokes regarding battery acid, so you've got to be careful calling people Nazis. You can't
you know what I'm
take offence. No, of course I know what you're on about, but I'm just covering my bases. In a sentence, what is it you voted to leave for? What was your big reason for voting?
Okay.
A sentence. I'm not going to pick you up on it. I just want to know for the record.
Okay, my main reason is, and rightly or wrongly, this is my own view on it, I've believed for a long period of time, long before the vote, I believe that Germany's running the show of this position. I believe you're going to have a United States of Europe, which I don't believe is right. And that's what, it's not the 350 million on the bus, it's not what the other nonsense we was told. Because anyone who believed that had to be a lemon in the first place.
Well, I'm afraid that if you're going to be knocking around, I'm a lot more comfortable with citrus fruit-based insults, but if you think they're lemons, mate, then I'm afraid it takes one to know one, because believing the United States of Europe and the Germany are in the box seat stuff is just as bonkers as believing in bendy bananas and three-pin plugs. But we are where we are, and I said I wouldn't haul you over the coals. I would urge you, though, to have a little think about why, in order to get what you think you want, you have to be led by a liar, and just ask yourself where those United States of Europe lines came from, where those Fourth Reich lines came from, where those Germany's in charge lines came from. And I'll tell you now, Andy, they came from exactly the same place as the man. In fact, a lot of them came from him. So you believed him then, you don't believe him now. Perhaps review the stuff that you fell for in the first place. I say that with love. Liam's in Sidcup. Liam, what do you reckon?
Hi. So I think the reason people are on board with this lie is the same reason that white supremacists didn't abandon Trump when he was basically forced to come out publicly and say that he disavows these groups.
We kind of did, didn't he? There was good people on both sides.
Well, but that's kind of my point, that there's almost a wink and a nudge.
Yeah, but this isn't a wink and a nudge. This is, I'm loving it. In the Daily Mail, I am being lied to, and I'm loving it because because it upsets people or something like that.
I think
don't even know what that means.
I think why they think it was such a blinder is because I think on some level these people know that if Boris Johnson had come out publicly and said the words, "I wanted to stop Parliament because it was getting in my way, and I just want to steamroller the whole process," they know that wouldn't have been acceptable. So they've got this slight veneer of plausible deniability there.
Yeah, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, that plausible deniability by applauding a lie. But you're onto something.
Deniability.
Implausible non-deniability.
It reminds me a little bit. I can't remember when you said this, but you said something about an incident with your flatmate where you'd stole his Jaffa cakes, and he knew you'd done it.
I'm going to tell you something now that I've never told anyone else before. That was Sir Bill Cash's youngest son. So it's got a very Brexit-related resonance to it.
But I think the fact is, like,
I had stolen his Jaffa cakes, and I refused to admit it.
Yeah, exactly.
And he knew. There's no way he could have, unless they'd grown legs and walked out of the flat. No one else had been in the building for that whole 24-hour period. I stole his Jaffa cakes. I refused to admit it. You're right. That is a good parallel.
Well, exactly. I mean, you knew you did it. He knew you did it. But unless you said those words out loud, that I stole your Jaffa cakes, I'm sorry, he could not prove it. I mean, you could, if you were really shameless, you could say, "Oh no, you ate them last week. Did you forget?"
Well, that would be gaslighting.
You ate them.
That would be gaslighting, wouldn't it?
Well, exactly. We're being the nation's been gaslit for years now. So
Boris Johnson, he actually ate your Jaffa cakes, but he swears blind he didn't. And Richard Littlejohn knows he did. Richard Littlejohn's seen the crumbs.
Yeah, he's seen the crumbs. He's pointing at the crumbs and he's laughing. But as long as Boris Johnson never says out loud, "I stole your Jaffa cakes," we're not going to get forensics around to prove that he stole the Jaffa cakes, so we can't actually prove it despite knowing it.
Yeah, even worse than that, actually. It is, once it emerges that I did steal the Jaffa cakes, people are going, "I knew all along you stole them and that you lied and I love you. You're the best. Haha, that'll teach those pesky, condescending, sneering Jaffa cake lovers." Thank you, Liam. I could carry on with this all day. Cue another apology for enjoying. It's like watching Rome burn, of course, except for half of Rome thinks that they're not flames at all. They're the precursors to the arrival of a big herd of unicorns. But if you've been reduced to saying the best thing about this is how bad other people feel, then you surely have to wonder at some point what else is good about it. Oh, I'm loving it. I am. It's really getting up the noses of people that have been proved right every day of the last 3 years. Ha 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 ha. Ha ha ha. He's going to get one over on you by lying. Well, that means we're even more right than we were before. You can't beat people with lies unless they're telling the truth. Yeah, I love it. It's great. How has it happened? I could carry on with this forever. I'll let you decide. The phone board, the switchboard is full, but I shall take advisement during the break on whether or not you want to move on to something else. Just have a little think about how various individuals in the public eye would have reacted if Theresa May had prorogued Parliament in the hope of getting her withdrawal agreement through. There's a lot of ifs and buts there. It's an entirely speculative and theoretical proposal. And it couldn't have happened. That's what I mean by theoretical. It's the difference between the legal instrument of Article 50 and the legislative ambition of a withdrawal agreement. But just imagine, how would the haunted pencil himself, J-Dog, have reacted if Theresa May had prorogued Parliament in the hope of doing something that he didn't want to happen? Yeah, funny that, isn't it? It's almost as if hypocrisy and double standards have become not mere side effects of public life, but under Boris Johnson's premiership, prerequisites. And Eddie Mair, of course, has been doing sterling work in reminding you of all the members of the current cabinet who held very strong views upon the proroguing of Parliament. Indeed, Boris Johnson himself, in writing, expressed his disdain for the very idea of proroguing Parliament in these sorts of circumstances. But it doesn't matter anymore. Because for some time, it's been more psychological than political. It's been more about cultishness than measurable exchanges. Well, why do you want it? I just do. What are you getting out of it now? What are the benefits? What are the pluses? What fun to hear the Ramonas squealing is a headline in the Daily Mail today. And it's far from alone. It's at various other places. I think there's a piece in the Times by a strange bloke making similar points. That's all you've got. All you've got left is that people who are worried that your life's going to get worse are getting more worried that your life's going to get worse. That's all you've got left as a reason. Littlejohn's life won't get worse. He certainly didn't spend that much of the year in the United Kingdom. I don't know what his current arrangements are, but he used to file a lot of his columns from America. And if you're on £1 million a year for writing a newspaper column, or in the case of Paul Dacre, his former boss, a multiple thereof, it's not cheap, running a grouse moor in Scotland. Their lives aren't going to get worse. And they're telling you that Brexit's a brilliant idea because people who think that your life is going to get worse are really worried. And they don't want it to happen. And that's your bail? That's your payoff? That's your jackpot? That's your 3 melons in a row? Ha ha. People who are worried that my life is going to get worse are even more worried today than they were yesterday. Ha ha, win, leave means leave. That's what they've done to you. And when I say to you the Prime Minister is lying, you can't even say fake news back at me now. They've got so little regard and respect for you. In such contempt do they hold you. Remember the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary wrote a book in which you were described as being among the idlest in the world. People who care only about football and pop music, I think, was the line. That's what they think of you. And every time you cheer, because people who think your life is going to get worse are feeling bad for you, every time you cheer, you prove them right. Every time you go, ha, ha, love it, salty Remainer tears, all those people over there who care about their fellow citizens, they're really, really hating this. You prove them right. They think you're thick and lazy and idle. You only care about pop music and you get to retire too early and you get paid too much, you've got far too many protections in the workplace. That's what they think of you. They told you that somehow this would be a blow against elites. The men who publish the Daily Telegraph own the Ritz Hotel. And they let Farage spew his nonsense about metropolitan elites. He had his birthday party there, in the Ritz Hotel. But yeah, he's the one that's going to mount a rear guard against the elites. And all that they've left you with now is this suggestion that you celebrate the discomfort of people who care about you. And the more discomfort you get, I don't know, the more celebrating you do. Is that how it works? Anyway, here's a little run-through. Matt Hancock, Amber Rudd, Andrea Leadsom, Nicky Morgan. You can almost take your pick. This is what we're reduced to now as a nation. These people, I think, are all in the cabinet.
And then there's this idea from some people, you might have heard of it. There's this idea from some people that to deliver Brexit, we should suspend our parliamentary democracy, that we should prorogue Parliament. But that goes against everything that those men who waded onto those beaches fought and died for. And I will not have it.
I mean, Boris Johnson's gone further than that as well. He hasn't ruled out proroguing or suspending Parliament in order to push through no deal. Which is absolutely outrageous. The idea of leaving the European Union in order to take back more control into Parliament and to consider closing Parliament in order to deal with that is the most extraordinary idea I've ever heard.
It was felt that it would not be something workable to prorogue Parliament. It's certainly not something I would seek to do anyway.
You wouldn't want to, though, would you? I mean, it completely subverts parliamentary democracy.
Exactly.
You were the leader of the House.
Exactly. No, I'm passionate about parliamentary democracy, and so yes, it was my job to make sure I understood the implications of different outcomes, but certainly not because it was something I was attempting to do.
You think it's a bad idea? Just to be clear, you think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
What did you think of Sir John Major saying today that he would actually be willing to take that to judicial review if Boris Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament?
Well, I thought it's extraordinary. I'm a great fan of Sir John's, and I think that if it were to happen, I still think, and the One Nation hustings, we quizzed both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt about prorogation. Neither said it was an option that they would be wanting to pursue. I think it would be extraordinary. I think it would lead to a constitutional crisis. But I'm very pleased that we have a past Prime Minister like Sir John, who is still willing to stick his neck above the parapet and say, I would not put up with this.
Up with this, I will not put. 20 minutes to 12. God, it's one of those days. I thought it was still 20 minutes to 11, but we've been here we're way past half-time. Put away your oranges. Get back on the pitch. 03456060973 is the number you need. If you can comment upon the descent of Great Britain into a place where significant swathes of the population enjoy being lied to, highly paid journalists celebrate the Prime Minister's lies, and voters are being fatted up to be fed a whole new raft of lies for reasons that I'm afraid I don't fully understand. I don't know for sure what they think they get out of it. I know what you get out of it, naff all, and they'll expect you to cheer as well, and you fell for it, but it's never too late. But what do they get out of it? I don't know. Gordon Brown's intervened. Johnson is not just shredding the Constitution, he is tearing our country apart. That would be the Kirkcaldy comprehensive educated Gordon Brown versus the old Etonian Boris Johnson. Once again, that's how you stick it to the elites. Ian's in Chesham. Ian, what do you think?
Well, I've been listening to you, and
that's a useful precursor, Ian.
It is, yeah. Well, the thing is that there's two issues here from just what you've just said. One is the two-faced issue,
yes,
which is they say one thing and another, and that's all self-preservation. And every MP is about self-preservation.
That's not true. That's not true.
I think most
there
of
are
them
good people in the House of Commons.
I didn't say there are bad people.
Right, but they're not all two-faced.
Well, there's a lot of them that are, because I've done, and I voted for both, and I'm a Remainer, by the way. I voted to Remain.
I'm not. I just worry that because some politicians are going even further down the road of dishonesty, there's an inevitable sense that they drag everybody with them. But there are decent people in the House of Commons on all sides.
I have a very decent MP.
Good.
Exceptional MP, and I don't argue with that.
Okay.
And I voted both Labour and Conservative because I look at the team and I look at what they are and do they give me what they want. And I voted for David Cameron because of something he said which he never delivered.
Oh.
And it wasn't the referendum.
Fair enough.
It had nothing to do with that.
Okay.
I was a Remainer because I didn't believe what they were saying and I didn't hear any hard questions asked by the public or anybody to make them stand up and think.
Yeah.
And, and I know there's a lot of risk. But this question of lying, I don't agree with lying. And I don't think you should applaud it. And I think the newspapers should not applaud it. But aren't we ourselves a little bit responsible for why they do it?
Probably.
Both the press, the media, and the public.
Oh, yes.
Because of the way we jump up and shout when they try to not say something that might be sort of discriminatory or against a certain group or something like that.
Well, you're not. But we were getting on so well, and you're playing the political correctness gone mad card now, aren't you?
No, I
yes,
don't agree with political correctness. I don't agree with political correctness, and I don't agree with being.
But what do you mean? Give me an example, if you would, then, of something that you feel should have been said but hasn't been said for fear of being accused of.
Well, I've got to be very careful because I might get into a situation. Let's say that there's a statistic that's absolutely clear that a senior politician is tackled with by somebody in the press, and the statistic is black and white there, and it's there, okay?
Right.
But it might create some kind of reaction.
But you need to give me an example.
Well, say they say that Group A is responsible for 98% of knife crime in Britain, okay? Don't read anything into that.
Well, I think we can all agree that knife crime is a much more prevalent problem among black communities than it is among other communities.
Okay, so you're saying that, but I'm trying not to get so.
But why do you think you can't say that? I just proved to you how easy it is.
Because then a politician immediately gets the backlash.
I don't think they do.
That he's being racist because then he's talking about stop and search because you get into that category again.
But they never shut up about stop and search, Ian.
Well, yeah, they don't, but. There are issues. Okay,
so you're telling me they can't talk about it, and then in the same breath you're telling me they never shut up about it.
Well, I don't.
Priti Patel's already unveiled it. I mean, I love you like a brother, Ian, even though we've only just met.
Well, hang on a second.
All right, maybe not like a brother.
Well, okay, I've heard them say something that implicates either a black community or some community.
Well, there you go. You've heard them say it.
I've seen the people on the street react to it, right?
No, you haven't, though, my friend.
And then look at what Boris said. Now you say, and
you're glossing over my charming and respectful interventions, but what you're saying isn't true.
Well,
there is no shortage of people standing up, and I mean some racists use it to either imply. Well, I haven't finished speaking yet, so you can't agree or disagree. Some racists use it to either imply or in some cases to even insist that being black somehow renders you more prone to violence. We know what their game is. And then more liberal and honest brokers would explain that actually it's poverty and socio-economic issues that see a fermentation of violence. It's more to do with geography than it is to do with ethnicity, and that is also a valid argument. So sometimes, certainly, racists use the statistics you describe to smuggle racism, but the idea that you can't say this stuff in public it's patently not true. I know you are, and I'm talking about Priti Patel. I'm talking about Nigel Farage, I think, is a politician officially speaking, and these people never shut up about the stuff that you're describing. You've fallen for it, my friend.
Well, I watch a lot of news, a lot of stuff, and a lot of...
Well, you say now the thing you think you're not allowed to say, and I swear to you that you won't get into any trouble at all.
If somebody stood up and said that 98% of knife crime is created by, say, the immigrant population...
Well, that wouldn't be true, would it? Because immigrant population means that you've arrived here.
Well, I don't know. I don't know the statistic.
Well, then you've ended up tying yourself in a silly old knot, Ian. Because there's plenty of statistics out there that you can say, but you've just made one up. And then suggested that you somehow wouldn't be allowed to get away with making stuff up. In the context of a conversation in which we're seeking to examine why a Prime Minister is being applauded for making stuff up. I look forward to our next conversation. We'll take this up to at least 12. The question has evolved slightly, developed even, you could argue. I can't shake off the sense that something really unprecedented has happened in the last 48 hours. It was probably always going to happen once Boris Johnson got into Downing Street, because as we've detailed exhaustively on this programme, everything Brexit-related has turned out not to be true, which means people are now pretending that they believed things that they didn't believe in 2016. They're pretending that people like Farage never talked about Norway or Switzerland or having more power than Norway, therefore it would be easy to do a deal. They're pretending, or at least even if they acknowledge that these people did say all of these things, they're absolutely adamant that none of that influenced their vote at all. Everybody who voted to leave the European Union that I've spoken to recently, who still thinks we should, did so because they believed the Remain side. And they knew all along that we were going to leave the customs union and the single market. So they voted alongside the people who said that that was all a big lie and Project Fear. Absolutely logical, makes perfect sense. Except, of course, it doesn't, which explains why the only way to get it over the line is to triple down on the lies, which is what Boris Johnson is doing. And, of course, people in my profession who have cheered this whole shoddy, despicable, nation-shaming process are left on the horns of a dilemma. For them, a very simple dilemma. Do we put our hands up, say sorry, and crave the forgiveness of our population, our readership, our listeners, who we told to leave the European Union? Or do we applaud the man who's now not even pretending that he's not lying? Answer, if you're Richard Littlejohn, you applaud Boris Johnson for lying. In fact, you quote the McDonald's advert and say, I'm loving it. Love being lied to. Why'd you go into journalism, mate? In order to congratulate prime ministers for lying to the British public. Whoa, OK. Takes all sorts. 11:53 is the time. Stephen's in Woking. Stephen, what would you like to say?
I think part of the reason why people support these lies and so on is they want to believe in something. They want, particularly those who've been left behind, this is for they want to believe in something, so they latch on to a lot of the nonsense, this hark back to empire or particularly the World War II rhetoric that keeps being spouted. They latch on to that, and they want to believe they're better than someone else, and it's got more sinister consequences too. Like if you look, there was a report last week about kids from the EU being discriminated against in schools, where 75% of the respondents had suffered attacks and abuse and so on in schools. 75%.
I haven't seen that story, so I'm taking your word for it.
It was in The Guardian last week.
Yeah,
they've done a survey. School kids being abused in this country, it's an absolute disgrace. It's shameful. And I think part of it, they want to believe they're better than something else. There's also been...
But we all want to believe that, don't we? Or do we? I don't know, actually.
I'm comfortable with myself, to be honest.
Yeah. I can't find the article you referred to. I've got one from 2016. School children.
No, there was one last week.
No, I believe you. I just can't. Just for the record, I can't find it. So that's all. But I don't think anyone will be too shocked, will they? By the suggestion, because we see it in the adult world as well. But don't. I know you're comfortable in yourself. I'm far too happy with myself, actually. So I'm an appalling example of somebody who feels the need to feel better than other people. I'm just trying to be a bit more generous than you, perhaps, and so don't we all want to feel special, don't we? And if you feel special because
special doesn't mean to say you have to put someone else down.
Yeah, but it does if you've got nothing else to feel special about, Stephen.
That's pretty sad. I mean, you also see there's been a dramatic increase in things like animal cruelty. There's also an increase in that as well. And I think it's all part of saying they want to feel better. They want to feel they can, and I just find it appalling. I find it appalling as well. But I'm trying to be I'm just trying to work it out, I suppose, a little more. And it is. Here's a weird... I've been thinking about this. I've got to start work on my new book soon. I've already spent the bloody money. But this question, there's a line in the novel I'm reading at the moment. It's really good, actually. S.J. Paris, who does these sort of Tudor detective novels, they're brilliant. But there's a line in it. The hero is being castigated by some sort of Tudor bureaucrat or priest, and they say, you have no respect for position or birth, right? And I'm reading that, and like you, I'd be damn right I don't. I've got respect for behaviour, achievements and character, not for inherited gongs and baubles and titles. But England is a place where
respect for position or birth is endemic. So you listen to somebody like Jacob Rees-Mogg talking undiluted nonsense, but in a patrician drawl, and you know that a significant swathe of Englishmen and women react very differently to his words compared to how they would react if they were delivered by someone with an estuary twang or a Hull accent. So that's deference, that's class, that's respect for birth. How can you sustain a system where you doff your cap and tug your forelock to someone who's got a plummy accent unless you're also buying into the notion that your accident of birth affords you special status? So even if you're the pauper at the gate of the castle, you're a goddamn English pauper, which makes you better than all those foreign paupers scrabbling for the same crumbs of food.
Yes, there's a lot in there, I think.
You are. Yeah, I like to think your silence is a sign of shock at the quality of my analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a better, but I think there is this sense of exceptionalism,
yeah.
which, you know, like I've spoken to you before, I lived a long time outside the UK, 14 years in Germany and 6 in the Netherlands, in Australia, and it's, well, I mean, it's okay, it's nonsense anyway, but you I think then you realise it's complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah. Well, they all had empires as well. I was in Austria last week, and of course, you don't know because we don't really study it in English schools. I could tell you about the Byzantine Empire, or Wattle and Daub Huts, or divorce beheaded died, divorce beheaded survived, but I couldn't tell you much about the Habsburgs. I couldn't tell you much about it couldn't even tell you that much about Napoleon, except that he got defeated by, of course, an alliance of German and English forces, Prussian and English forces. You're right. I think you're right. And it's a horrible thing to say because it leads me to that observation about, well, if you've got nothing else to feel special about, then the people who tell you that you're special because you're English, their work is half done before they've even opened their mouths. But you've got lots of other things to feel special about. You've got the love of a good woman or the love of a good man. You've got children. You've got, you've got a functioning intellect. You've got an eye. I tell you, I interviewed yesterday. Really, really inspirational man. Timothy Spall, the actor. Battersea born and bred. His mum used to have a little hair salon on the back stairs of their council house in Battersea. But the way he speaks about the artists that he's portrayed on screen, there's so much to take pride in without being reduced to pretending that the only thing in life you can take pride in is the colour of your passport. Not even the colour of your skin. The colour of your passport. That's I guess, the dismal conclusion that you're led to by the theory of English exception is, why the hell are we doing this? Well, because we don't like foreigners. Really? Yeah, but not all foreigners. We like some of them. But generally, we don't like foreigners. Even the fellow earlier, nice bloke. Why'd you vote Leave? Because the Germans trying to take over. Well, they're not, mate. Doesn't matter. I believe that they are. And of course, what the media has done is afford the same respect to a false belief as it has to a true belief. And that, in a nutshell, is why we are where we are.